Coming up right now is a young lady that I have been following for a while. I can't believe it's been this long. Well, it took me this long to even get her on the show, but she is a she might she might get me on this one. I think she's an expert. I think she's an expert on the Constitution. I mean, she speaks. She's a national speaker on it, and I mean, believe me, she breaks it down. She understands what's going on. I'm surprised that a whole lot of uh, presidential cabinets aren't running to her and asking her about certain things. But she's the author. She's a she's been on TV. She's also been featured on C-SPAN and Fox Fox News and Newsmax. But she is out there, and there's no other better person I feel than to talk to about what's going on about the migrant issue, or even about the freedom of speech situation that's happening in the media right now than KrisAnne Hall. Let's bring her on. Hey, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Wayne. It is so great to see you. It's been a long time.
Thank you. And look, I'm so glad that we still have individuals out there that care about the Constitution enough to dive into it, to understand it and explain it for this generation and the next. Um, what motivated you to get this deep into the Constitution, and how did that come about?
Well, when I was in law school, I started reading a couple of letters and papers by the drafters of our Constitution, and I started realizing that what we're taught in law school is not the Constitution. And I found out through my studies that we don't even teach the Constitution in the majority of law schools anymore. We teach something called constitutional law, which teaches that judges and lawyers know more about the Constitution than the men who wrote it. And then we spend the rest of our legal careers and our legal education learning how to circumvent the Constitution so we can win our arguments. So it's all about winning. It's not about preserving the constitutional republic. And so when I started reading what the founders wrote, what the drafters wrote about what the Constitution was supposed to do and what they meant when they wrote it, I realized, number one, we're not teaching the Constitution. Number two, it's no mystery what they meant. We don't have to have some kind of mystic ball, and you don't have to have 12 years in the Supreme Court to understand what it means. They wrote it in plain English, and they made it very clear.
Progressives, socialists, liberals, whatever they are, when you flip the coin, they want to call it a living document so that they can change it at will whenever they want to change it. How do you feel about that?
Well, my feelings are probably pretty obvious, but I also think they're irrelevant, Wayne, because the truth of the matter is the Constitution is not what they would call a living, breathing document. And you defined it properly. You said when they call it a living, breathing document, they mean something that they can change on whim. Our Constitution is written with a specific procedure on how to change the Constitution, and it's interesting because that procedure is really difficult. And they made it really difficult on purpose because the Constitution is supposed to be a standard. It's not supposed to be changing by those in power or by political whim or even by social changes. The Constitution was written precisely to protect us from whim and social change because the drafters of our Constitution knew that the tides of human nature will wax and wane, but we needed a standard for government to keep it the same all the time so the people could know how government's supposed to operate and how and what their government's supposed to do and not supposed to do every single day.
Why is it? What, I mean, if it's so plain and simple, uh, and the Constitution is supposed to be the blueprint roadmap for how this country is supposed to be run, why are we having so much problems at the border right now in protecting this country? What I mean, what's the what's the why? Why? What's going on at the border with the Constitution in place?
Well, it's really interesting. The border problem is really a symptom of a greater problem that we have here in America, and that's because the law schools are not the only schools that stop teaching the Constitution. We stopped teaching the Constitution and the proper mechanisms of government a long, long time ago. As a matter of fact, I've traced it back to the changing of a single source in 1833. And that's when our schools stopped teaching that we are a constitutional republic and started teaching more in the lines of being a, a, a federal supremacist kind of government, where the federal government is the source of all of our solutions, the source of all power, and every other government and every other person is simply in submission to it. And the reason that we have this border problem, Wayne, is because we're actually living in a post constitutional chaos. First and foremost, what we need to understand as Americans, Donald Trump has a lot of pressure on him to do things that, frankly, as a president, he's not supposed to be doing. If you look at the Constitution under the authority to repel invasions and insurrections, that power falls under the realm of the legislative branch, not the executive branch. And Donald Trump really doesn't have an authority to call troops to go to the border. Now, we know that Congress has sort of shirked their responsibility and avoided their accountability through creations of things like the War Powers Act. But James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and James Wilson would all tell you that the War Powers Act is completely unconstitutional because the Congress is not allowed constitutionally to delegate power, their power, to the executive branch. That was a specific separation of powers created to limit the authority of the president and keep control of things like the military in the hands of the people.
How did now? I remember watching after 9/11. I remember Congress. No, I remember. Yeah, well, the House of Representatives and the Senate shift a lot of their power to the president at the time. I had never seen that before. I don't even know if the country had ever been like that before. And Barack Obama kept it and carried it. Let me ask you a pointed question. A lot of things have gone down since 9/11 because Congress has shifted their responsibility over to the president. I hope I'm not getting you in trouble with this.
I ain't scared.
Are a lot of things legal? The way that things are going with the way that the presidents have been passing without Congress having to say so or giving the green light?
No, very little of it is constitutional. And like I said, the problem that we have at the border, Wayne, is the fact that our Congress is not doing their job. And a lot of pressure is on the president to do a job that he's not really he's not empowered to do or equipped to do. And so in the meantime, because the American people have failed to learn their constitution properly, again, since the beginning of 1833, we don't actually know that. I mean, I listen to the news, I listen to talk shows, and I hear people say all the time, why isn't Donald Trump doing something? And people are frustrated. Well, the proper directive should be, why isn't our Congress doing something? They're the ones that are supposed to be doing this, not Donald Trump. Now, if Donald Trump wants to do something, what he should be doing is organizing the governors so that the governors can call the state militias to the borders to protect them. That's pretty much what the president can do at this point without a formal act by Congress. And because Congress, I mean, think about it, we haven't had a real constitutional platform from a president from a very, very long time. And that's because the people look to the president to do things he's not supposed to do. The president can't raise or lower taxes, constitutionally speaking, and constitutionally speaking has nothing to do with jobs. He has nothing to do with the movement of troops unless there is a formal declaration of war by Congress, which there hasn't been since 1942. And so a lot of the things that we as the American people ask the president to do are things that we should be demanding that our Congress take care of. You know, we have a founder named Samuel Adams who gave a perfect quote to describe what's going on today. He said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, "But on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." And that's what happens. We've made such a huge federal government now that it's practically uncontrollable.
Right, right. It's a lot of tentacles reaching into the various pots, merging different things, not caring about what the Constitution, Bill of Rights, what any of it all means, and it's creating a huge problem. Let me move over to the press. The press has been pushing First Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights for Jim Acosta, and well, not really CNN, Jim Acosta, because of his actions, continued actions against the White House press secretary and the president. Was President Trump legally? I mean, could President Trump legally remove somebody's press credential?
Well, you know, Wayne, we discussed this. I have a radio show too, and we discussed this some time ago. I mean, a long time ago, where I said, you know, these press pass situations are a really dangerous, slippery slope. We have a saying in law that says, "Bad facts make bad law," and what we have now is a situation where media is seeking approval from the executive branch to be a part of this, what they call the press corps. And if we handled this properly, there would be no press corps. Okay, so what would happen is people would apply for a an invitation to be there, because certainly we need people to go through background checks and that sort of thing if they're going to get that close to the president. I mean, think about it. We're supposed to have background checks for to own a firearm. So why would it be unreasonable for us to have a background check to get that close to the president of the United States? Um, and there is a right to freedom of press, but that is not associated specifically with journalists. And that's the problem. Freedom of
Oh,
press by those who drafted the Constitution means the freedom to disseminate your ideas and your thoughts through whatever medium is available to you. It's not about journalists, and it's certainly not about getting presidential approval. Now,
wow.
a violation of Acosta's right would be to say to these people, you can only talk about this stuff. All right. Now, we're mixing these terms, freedom of press and disorderly conduct, because you have a right to freedom of press, but you don't have a right to stand in front of the president, and you don't have a right to be physically abusive to people. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
that's the problem. And so you can lose your liberties by violating the liberties of others. And that's what Acosta did. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Franklin wrote about it in 1722. And he said that this liberty of thought, this liberty of speech, he said it should know no bounds other than you cannot harm or control the rights of another. And when Acosta is completely taking over, he won't let anybody else express themselves.
Right, right.
And he's physically putting his hands on other people. He has
Yep.
said publicly, I am no longer engaging in a rightful action of expression of my rights. I am now infringing on others. And that's the problem.
You know what? It's well. I'm glad that you said that. And what I want to do is I want to bring you back after the break and ask you a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Okay, that's
Ladies and
fine.
gentlemen, You've been watching KrisAnne Hall here on the Wayne Dupree Show. We're getting ready to take a hard break. When we come back, we want to ask her a couple more questions. I hope this has been enlightening to you, because I know that I love hearing about history, and I also love hearing about the Constitution, because it is our blueprint for America. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Wayne Dupree Show. I'm your host, Wayne Dupree. And before we get back to my guests, I just want to let you know that all those that are having issues finding the show, you don't know what time we broadcast, where can I watch the show, the best place to do is go to waynedupree.com/radio live, okay? And also you can go to americasvoicenews.com. Either one of those, you know that the show is going to be. You don't have to go searching around YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope. You can go to either one of those, waynedupreeshow.com/radio live. The video is right there. You can't miss it. It's a beautiful video. I've cleaned out all the ads, so you don't have to see anything other than the video. Or you can go to americasvoicenews.com and check it out there. Now, let me bring on my guests for KrisAnne Hall. Let me bring on one for an additional question. I also want her to, Kris, I want you to let people know how they can contact you on social media, please.
Okay, well, we have a website, KrisAnneHall.com, KrisAnnehall.com. I'm on Twitter at KrisAnne Hall. I'm on Instagram by my name, KrisAnne Hall. I'm on LinkedIn, and our radio show is carried by SoundCloud, TuneIn, iTunes, Google Music Play. And we have an online constitutional training program called Liberty First University, and that's libertyfirstuniversity.com. And so those are primarily the ways that you can find us.
We also grabbed one of your books. Let me get that book up here real quick. And if you could give us a brief synopsis on not a living, breathing document, Reclaiming Our Constitution, could you give us a brief synopsis of that, please?
Sure, it's like we were talking about before. The Constitution is not based on whim. It's not based on ideas. It's actually based on over 700 years of history. And there are 5 written documents that were created over those 700 years that literally became our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, and our Bill of Rights. Those 5 documents were British Liberty Charters, and that's where we get most of the language and principles for our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And it's the Declaration of Independence that's actually was a legal requirement for all British subjects under the second document in that history called the Magna Carta. And what I do in that book, as well as a class that I teach at Liberty First University, is I take you through that history. And I show you how that history and those experiences created what Jefferson called the self-evident truths that created our Constitution and our Declaration and our Bill of Rights. And in that history, Wayne, you will be totally amazed at how precisely that history is repeating today, because history always repeats. And those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And it's just simply a principle of human nature. I'm sure you're familiar with a guy named Solomon who said there is nothing new under the sun. And that's because a matter of human nature, Wayne, just raise your hand if this applies to you. We always end up making the same stupid mistakes over and over again. Yeah, right. And so think about that's on a micro scale. Think about that on a macro scale. And then what you have is history. And as a Christian, I believe that God gave us memory. He gave us history as a gift so that we can create a better tomorrow. And what we've done is we've wiped that history out of our history books so that people could rewrite how our government is supposed to work. And so people see the rewriting and they don't understand why it's wrong and why it's bad. And they don't understand step 2, right? Step 1, national health care looks good. Step one, the Patriot Act looks good. Step one, what the Department of Homeland Security does looks good. It's step two that we're missing, and it's the history that teaches us the dangers of step two.
Well, I'm going to bring you back on again because I have some more questions, but I am running out of time. So I thank you for joining me here on the show tonight, and let's do it again.
Thank you, Wayne. Anytime, just give me a call.
Ladies and gentlemen, KrisAnne Hall. And before I leave, I just wanted to say, once again, if you wanted to watch the show or you want to connect with the show, now there's two central locations that it will always be on. WayneDupree.com/radio live. You can watch the show there, or you can watch the show at AmericasVoiceNews.com. If you are not a Patreon member, ladies and gentlemen, Patreon is where I give also exclusive material, such as videos, audios, articles, things that you don't see on regular media platforms. Patreon.com is something I think that all of you should check out.